Today on CityCast Pittsburgh, dozens of Pittsburgh public schools went virtual last week, not because of COVID, but because of extreme heat. The buildings that city kids are learning in are so old. WESA reports they're an average age of 89 years old, so most of them don't have air conditioning and they can't be retrofitted with building-wide systems. But the district could be doing more, and little by little, our region will definitely be getting hotter. We're with the district's leading advocacy organization to talk about the options. It's Tuesday, June 6th. I'm Megan Harris, and here's what Pittsburgh's talking about. I'm with James Fogarty of A+ Schools. James, I feel like you and I are never talking about good stuff. What's going on?
Come on now, Megan. I mean, yeah. I usually get called when, there's a problem. So
I know.
And
I know you shared working space in one of these super old buildings. What's it been like on one of those 90-plus degree days?
Man, it's hot in those buildings, right? You go up and you see kids that are sweating, and you see teachers sweating. And, for us, we recognize that there's a lot of priorities in the district, and getting some of our capital improvements done that need to be done, like HVAC, are important. It can be tough. It can be tough to teach. It can be tough to learn.
Yeah.
When it's super hot.
Do the buildings ever get to cool off even overnight? I know you can't open windows in a school building. It's a security thing.
Yeah. That's partially why I think the district came out, right, and made this plan around, if we're going to hit this heat index, we're probably going to just need to shut down for kids and for the teachers. And
the plan is a virtual learning plan to allot for these 90-plus degree days when it's just not safe for kids to be in these buildings.
That's right. And we're not the only district, right? You're seeing Philly had some closures last week and went to remote, and some other districts across the state have done that. Now, districts in our region, right? Pittsburgh has some of the oldest buildings. And so for that reason, you see many more of our buildings closing than, outer lying suburban districts.
Is this a uniquely Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania thing? I've heard of some school districts in New England, for example, when they were built, we had the weather that was fine for that. It was a different time. But now with climate change and everything else,
I think just a few degrees difference, right, makes a huge difference for kids. And especially when you think about school years and the times in which kids were coming in, right? Maybe you had a few hot days in August, but things were starting to cool off by September, and then things start heating up by June when you're heading out. But climate change means 2, 3, 4 degree difference, and then that's average, right? So that can mean 20 degree difference, right? So it's how do we adjust for a new reality that is just going to be hotter? It's just going to be hotter. So we had a year ago said, hey, if there's anything you can do, and again, I said this as a parent and as an advocate, if there's anything you can do with some of the federal dollars to put even just temporary wall units. Mitsubishi makes a nice product, right? It doesn't need to be ventilated.
You mean the ones that stick in windows or something else?
No, they're ones that you can actually put on a wall where you don't have access to ventilation, external ventilation. And part of the issues, right? Any one of us can come up with hey, this sounds good, right? And then when you're inside a system, right, it's much more difficult to see how, and they have clear lines of sight on okay, how do we implement that, and what are the trade-offs of taking this recommendation from an advocate to go buy a bunch of these wall-mounted units and get them in. I have no clue, right, what the electrical capacity is in most of these buildings. Could it have handled it or not? I don't know. I have no clue sort of what it would take to mount these things. Could our walls handle it? Are they built for it? Right? So there's a bunch of questions that the district didn't answer, but unfortunately they weren't either able or didn't put those wall mounted units in. And so,
Yeah, I know you made that recommendation for some air conditioning units using, I think it was pandemic
yep,
relief money
yep.
back in 2022.
Hmm.
What are the schools doing about this, other than closing the building?
Yeah. So they've got like, they're doing more like full HVAC like implementation in older buildings, right? So much deeper work across a whole building, again, can only be really done in the summer because you're adding,
And expensive work and
right,
slow work. I think
slow.
the district said they're only going to get to 4
That's
this
right.
summer.
That's right. So you can't do a ton of them, and especially with the money, the capital costs of like implementing a full new HVAC system, you got to design. There's a lot of lead time on design because you got to think about like, where do I place this stuff in a building where those access points weren't really thought of when it was built, right? It was like open the windows, and so I think what that just takes a lot longer. And then, you're also doing this in the context of considering closing some buildings as we continue to lose student population. So it wasn't like I was like fired up that we were closing, but I totally get it. Like they come out of those buildings some days just red and sweaty, and that's tough. It's tough on them. It's tough for the teachers because everyone's struggling. I mean, I'm cranky when I'm hot, right? So I know I know my kids get cranky too.
What are the effects of a hot classroom on learning? I mean, aside from crankiness, which is not going to help anyone, right?
So there's actually some research that's been done on this, right? I think in my testimony last year, I cited a paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research that says, I think it was like 0.2 of a standard deviation equated to I want to say a couple months of learning, like over time, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, it was enough for the folks to say, yeah, heat does have an effect on learning, and they could quantify it, within a range that was less. So the big statement is less learning happens when you're hot, right? Because I think for two reasons, right? Both your capacity to cognitively process, and then also the capacity of the educator to be able to like manage what's going on in the classroom is diminished.
Hey, CityCast Pittsburgh, it's Michael Ziviak. While CityCast Pittsburgh works hard every day to connect you with the stories that matter most, I'm working in the background making sure that our listeners are connecting with the best that Pittsburgh has to offer. So what does that look like? It means meeting with the people who make Pittsburgh what it is. The business owners, the stakeholders, the decision makers. The Pittsburghers who put together those food festivals you enjoy, the concerts you attend, the exhibits you can't miss, and who make those candles your mom can't stop talking about. If this sounds like you, let me help you get your message out to the city's best audience with an ad right here on the CityCast Pittsburgh podcast and on our sister daily newsletter, Hey Pittsburgh. Shoot me an email at ads@citycast.fm and let's connect.
When we're talking about retrofitting buildings, some of which are, on the upper end, 100 years old, how do you think that the district is balancing all of that with declining enrollment? I think last I saw, they're down like 20% since 2016. I don't know how many kids that actually equates to.
It has about 4,000 kids. If you look by like 2030, I think like the total loss like between 2016 and 2030 would be close to like 7,000 kids. So
do we even need all these buildings then?
yeah, no. I mean, right now we have basically double the capacity for the kids that we have, right? Just based on
which means that the district is paying to maintain all these buildings that we're not using now and won't use in the future.
That's right. That's right. We have, a couple years ago, they were spending almost 4 times as much on, I think it's like closer to 3 now, on custodial and maintenance folks for buildings as we were on counselors and social workers, right? So like, and again, on the big scheme though, most of our payment is going to personnel, right? And which is, again, we have low teacher turnover. That's a good thing. And we're not going to save a ton. I think the estimates a couple years ago, and maybe it's gone up with inflation, but like the cost estimates were between $1 and $2 million of savings per building closed, because you don't really, the students move, you don't really reduce a ton of teachers per se, right? As a result, you do probably reduce some of the maintenance staff. You merge administrative roles and people may retire. So you have some attrition there. But yeah, no, we have a lot of buildings for too few kids. And it does have programmatic impacts too. Like to me,
I bet.
it's more about like, can I have access to a ton of electives in a high school if the high school continues to get smaller and smaller, right? And do you have all the supports available for kids in a building, the diverse interests, diverse, disabilities that they have, if you're spreading those kids kind of out across a bunch of buildings, right? So
yeah, well, how does consolidation work? Because I know closing a community school can, first of all, just be very sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
People have strong feelings about that. But also logistically, you need kids to be near where they live so they can get there.
I mean, yes and no. Like the near part is interesting just because we're a city where almost 60% of the kids make a choice not to go to their neighborhood school. There's no neighborhood school that has greater, the capture rate for the kids in the area that's greater than 50%.
Really?
None. Yeah. So and it's South Pittsburgh has the highest utilization, and even those are in 45, 46%.
Is that ideal? Is that what we should want? Or is that just a product of our charter system?
It's not even charters. I mean, think about all the magnets within the district too, right? Most, if you look at utilization, right? White families are typically using magnets in private schools. Black families are typically using charters and magnet schools as their choice schools, right? So when you see the kind of differences, you have a city where there's about 35,000 kids in the city. A little less than 6,000 of the kids that live in the city go to charters. 20,000 go to our district public schools, and the rest are private homeschool. Some we don't know, right? There's just so yeah, the choice. I mean, I think families are always going to want choices for their child that meet the needs of the child, right? If a child's artistic and CAP is a good option, great, go take that. I think for us, what we're trying to figure out is what do families? Okay, so I don't know if we know really well what is driving a family's decision to send a child across the city.
But to take advantage of a magnet or even a charter, you need the resources to actually get there. You need the support services to make sure that that's possible for you and your family.
Sure, but those are pretty well set. No, Meg, they're just really set up. If I say, hey, I'm sending my kid to a charter, I've got transportation. The district has to transport my child. If I say I'm sending my kid to a private school, the district has to transport my child to that private school if it's within 10 miles of the city. So that's a resource that's checked, right? And if I make, the problem is in the decision making and the understanding. There's this knowledge difference, right?
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I'm getting at, I guess, is does it in effect create another disparity where we end up with more Black and Latino children are in these old buildings, hot as heck, not able to learn because there's just a difference. Yeah. Yeah,
without a doubt. Without a doubt, right? If you look at what was open, there are a couple schools that have been retrofitted that also serve predominantly Black and brown kids, Arlington pre-K to 8 is one that was recently redone and has AC. So it didn't close last week, right? Which is great because that school had some of the highest rates of chronic absence in the city last year, right? So not creating a situation where it's hey, we're getting to the end of the school year and don't come, right? It was good that it was open. But my worry is the one you just pointed out, right? That we do have predominantly Black and brown kids in old buildings that aren't able to get in. So when do we get to this? The issue I have is in talking to board members is when can we get to this conversation that's about the future, right? That's about what's the district that we want for our children? What are the programs, services, and opportunities we want to create? And then how do we start to think about consolidation, not as just losing buildings, but actually planning for something bigger and better.
James Fogarty is the executive director of A+ Schools. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Megan. Appreciate the time.
A little more news before you go. Speaking of Pittsburgh Public, Oliver Citywide Academy will be closed through the end of the year. Students will finish their final few days remotely after a 15-year-old student there was shot and killed just outside the school. His name was Derek Harris, and he is the second student killed at Oliver in the last 2 school years. One board member recently criticized the district in an op-ed in the Trib for not talking more about his death and how to prevent future ones. The board is planning to talk about the future of the school during a committee meeting tonight at 5:30. You can stream that online at pghschools.org. And some good news, there's a new Pittsburgh summertime passport to help families make the most of this season. It's free, all on your phone via text or email, no apps to download, and you can earn prizes for checking in at the museums or at Kennywood, any participating attraction that is recommended by Visit Pittsburgh to get the good deals and discounts. There's a link to it in our Hey Pittsburgh newsletter. That's all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. If yins have any thoughts, ideas, suggestions, even gripes, you can always let us know by calling or texting us. That's 412-212-8893. Or you can email us. We're pittsburgh@citycast.fm and on Twitter and Instagram @CityCastPGH. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Talk to y'all soon. Oh, yeah, that mic's much better, but I can definitely hear your air conditioning. I guess that's apropos.